I stood in the community center clutching my certified association manager certificate, hands shaking from pure exhaustion. The gold foil seal caught the fluorescent lights like it was mocking me. 4 years of night classes after full-time shifts managing complaints, budgets, and vendor contracts for Maple Grove Estates, and this piece of paper was supposed to be my shield. I placed it gently on the folding table next to the 3-inch binder I had spent the last 2 weeks compiling. This was it. The certificate was the credential, but the binder was the leverage. Karen Whitaker, our HOA president, sat across from me in her pastel pink pantsuit, the one that screamed, "I'm approachable, but don't test me." She was scrolling through her phone, probably checking the neighborhood Facebook group for the latest violations she could pounce on. She didn't even glance at the certificate. I pushed the binder toward her. "Karen, I ran the numbers," I said, voice steady. I'd rehearsed this in the shower, in my car, in the quiet hum of the server closet where I stored our master compliance files. Since I took over operations 4 years ago, violation disputes are down 60%. Vendor retention is up 40% in a market where every other HOA is bleeding contractors, and the new automated fine routing software I implemented saved us $112,000 in legal fees just last 2 quarters. Karen finally looked up. She didn't open the binder. She gave me that familiar maddening half-smile that suggested I was a child showing off a finger painting rather than the woman who had kept this place from collapsing under its own ridiculous rules. "We're doing wonderfully, Rachel," she said, voice smooth and dismissive. "The whole board is pulling their weight." I pressed on, hands clasped to hide the tremor. "I'm making $45,000 a year as operations coordinator. The average for a certified manager in this state with my experience is $130,000. I'm not asking for the cap. Just 85. That's fair. Barely market rate for what I deliver." Karen sighed, a long theatrical exhale through her nose. She took off her reading glasses and rubbed the bridge like I was the exhausting one. "Money is tight, Rachel. You know the margins on HOA dues. Landscaping costs are up. Insurance is killing us. Profit is up 22%, I countered, tapping the binder. "I know because I wrote the financial report you signed last week." She slammed her hand on the table. Not violent, just loud enough to silence me. "Enough with the spreadsheets. You're obsessed with the math. But you forget the heart of this community. We're a family association. We make sacrifices." She put her glasses back on and looked at me, ice cold. "You're lucky you even have this role here. Most HOAs wouldn't let you juggle flexible hours while chasing that piece of paper." She nodded vaguely at my certificate. "I carried you while you played student. Don't come in here demanding a payday just because you printed some charts. Now, I have a luncheon with the garden club." I sat there a full minute after she left. I looked at the certificate. Lucky, I had worked full-time days, studied full-time nights, and personally renegotiated every single vendor contract that kept our pool, lawns, and security from falling apart during the last recession. And she called it carrying me. I stood up, picked up my binder, and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I just went back to my desk and processed 47 violation notices because that's what I did. I was the engine. Engines don't complain. They just burn. 48 hours later, the engine ceased. It was an all-residents meeting. The clubhouse floor was cleared of folding chairs and the neighbors gathered in a semicircle. There were about 60 of us, retired couples with clipboards, young families with strollers, and the usual suspects who lived for drama. The air smelled of cheap coffee, air freshener, and old resentment. Karen stood on a makeshift podium made of 2 stacked plastic bins. She was beaming like she'd just won the lottery. "Big changes. Everyone," Karen boomed, her voice echoing off the beige walls. "Maple Grove Estates is evolving. We need fresh eyes. We need dynamic leadership to take our community relations to the stratosphere." I stood in the back, arms crossed, leaning against a support beam. A cold pit formed in my stomach. I knew what was coming, but my brain refused to accept the logic. "Please join me in welcoming our new director of community harmony," Karen shouted, sweeping her arm toward the side door. Brittany Whitaker walked out. Karen's daughter, 27. Spent the last 5 years finding herself in Bali, then Austin, then some influencer phase that ended when her TikTok about essential oils got ratioed into oblivion. She had never balanced a budget, never negotiated a landscaping contract, never understood the difference between a compliance fine and a city ordinance. She thought LTL meant long-term lease. She was wearing a cream blazer that cost more than my mortgage payment, immaculate heels that clicked on the tile like tiny judgments, and a smile that was dazzling, practiced, and completely empty. "Hi, neighbors," she chirped, waving like she was on a parade float. "Brittany brings a wealth of creative energy," Karen continued, clapping her hands. "She's going to revitalize our brand, and to make sure she has everything she needs to succeed, she'll be spearheading our new satellite office in the clubhouse annex. We're setting her up with a company golf cart, full expense account, and a dedicated assistant so she can focus on the big picture." The room was silent. The retirees looked at each other. They knew who fixed their violation appeals when the system glitched. They knew who stayed until midnight routing emergency landscaping crews around snowstorms. They looked at me. I didn't move. I felt something inside my chest click, soft, metallic, and final, like a deadbolt sliding home. The applause was scattered and polite. As the meeting broke up, Karen hugged Brittany. I walked up to them. My legs felt mechanical. "Congratulations, Brittany," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Oh, Rachel." She hugged me, enveloping me in vanilla perfume that probably cost more than my car. "Isn't it exciting? Mom says we're going to be such a power team. I have so many ideas for the welcome signs. They're so beige. You know." I pulled away and looked at Karen. "Director of Community Harmony. That's a new title. It's a necessary role," Karen said, jaw tightening. "How much?" I asked. "Rachel." "Not here." "How much?" I repeated, barely whispering. Karen leaned in, eyes narrowing. 150,000 plus commissions. 150. 3 times my salary for a job that didn't exist for a girl who thought a violation notice was a suggestion. "And the golf cart?" "For image," Karen said, defiant. "She's the face of the community. Rachel, you're the back office. You don't need a golf cart to count grass blades." "I see." "Don't start with the jealousy," Karen snapped, pointing a finger at my chest. "This is my daughter. You should be happy she's finally settling down. You're the stable one. Rachel, you can handle the grind. She needs encouragement. You support her. That's your job." "My job." "Understood." I turned around and walked back to my desk. The certificate was still there, sitting next to the rejected binder. I moved them both aside. I opened my email. 42 unread violation appeals. A landscaping crew stuck in Ohio. A resident in the cul-de-sac needed a quote. A security gate had a medical emergency. I answered every single one. I worked with terrifying clarity. I updated the spreadsheets. I approved the payroll. I scheduled the maintenance for the fleet of mowers and pool cleaners. I worked through lunch while I heard Karen and Brittany laughing in the conference room discussing paint colors for the new annex. I wasn't angry. Anger is hot. This was absolute zero. The realization that I wasn't a board member and I wasn't a neighbor. I was an appliance. A toaster doesn't get a raise. A toaster doesn't get thanked. A toaster just makes toast until it burns out and then you buy a new one. At 6 o'clock, the clubhouse emptied out. Karen and Brittany left together for a celebratory dinner. They didn't ask me to come. "Don't stay too late, Rachel," Karen called over her shoulder. "Remember to lock the gate." "I will," I said. I waited until the taillights of her Mercedes faded from the parking lot. Then I opened my laptop. I opened a blank document. "Dear Mrs. Whitaker, please accept this letter as formal notification that I am resigning from my position as operations coordinator at Maple Grove Estates HOA. My last day will be 2 weeks from today. Standard notice. Professional. Impeccable." My finger hovered over the print button, but then I paused. I minimized the letter and opened the HOA shared drive. It was a labyrinth of data I had built brick by brick over 4 years. I clicked on the subfolder named System Core. Inside was a single massive Excel file titled Master Compliance Logic V9 XSM. It wasn't just a spreadsheet. It was the brain of the entire neighborhood. It contained the macros that calculated fines based on violation severity and repeat offenses. It held the proprietary algorithm I wrote to pair vendors with schedules to maximize legal hours and minimize overtime. It contained the contact information for the 3 guys at the city permitting office who could rush an inspection when the pool was backed up. Contacts not in the official CRM, just in my notes and in the logic of this file. I looked at the file properties. Author, Bennett. Karen didn't know how to open this file. Brittany didn't know it existed. The board members used a front-end interface that pulled data from this file, but they didn't know how it worked. If this file broke or the links were severed, the compliance system would revert to manual entry. They would have to route 60 properties a day using paper maps and a calculator. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. If I left, they would lose me. That was a staffing problem. But if I took my intellectual property with me, they wouldn't just lose a coordinator, they would lose the map. I reached into my purse and pulled out a USB drive. "You want me to lock the gate, Karen?" I whispered to the empty room. "I'll lock everything." The drive home from the clubhouse that night was quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacuum. I didn't turn on the radio. I needed to hear my own tires on the asphalt to remind myself I was actually moving, that I wasn't just stuck in the same loop I'd been running for a decade. As the streetlights blurred past, my mind drifted backward to the beginning, to the days when I was naive enough to believe meritocracy existed inside these gates. I was 22 when I officially started volunteering on the board. I didn't start with a title. I started at 4 in the morning in the dead of winter, standing on the curb with a clipboard and hands so cold I couldn't feel the pen. Karen had told me to lead the inspections. "You have to know what the residents do." It sounded like wisdom at the time. So I bought steel-toed boots. I wore a safety vest that smelled like the previous owner's cigarettes. I learned how to measure grass to the exact 1/4 inch so no one got fined for being a millimeter off. I learned the difference between a bonded vendor and a common one the hard way by cleaning up the mess when a cheap subcontractor dropped a pallet of pool chemicals off a lift gate. I remembered one specific morning about 6 months in. I was covered in mulch because a hose had burst on the landscaping truck, and I was the only one small enough to crawl under the chassis to clamp it until the mechanic arrived. My hair was matted. My fingernails were black. Karen had walked by escorting a potential new resident through the neighborhood. She stopped, pointed at me, her dedicated board member, looking like a gardener's rag doll, and beamed. "That is dedication," she told the newcomer. "That is the Maple Grove work ethic. We get our hands dirty." The newcomer looked impressed. Karen looked proud. And I felt a surge of warmth. I thought I was earning my stripes. I thought I was paying the admission fee for a future seat at the table. Later that day in the break room, Karen handed me a bottle of water and squeezed my shoulder. "You're doing good work, Rachel. Keep this up. Another few years. Once you know every blade in this neighborhood, you'll be operations director. You'll have equity in the community spirit." The words were always vague enough to be deniable but specific enough to keep me hungry. The timeline was always next quarter, or when the dues stabilize, or after this big inspection. I chased that horizon for 8 years. Then there was Brittany. If I was the foundation, buried in the dirt and holding up the weight, Brittany was the weather vane, shiny, spinning in the wind, and completely decorative. While I was learning how to audit landscaping logs, Brittany was finding herself. That was the family euphemism for quitting things. She dropped out of college 3 times. She moved to Los Angeles to become an influencer, but came back 4 months later because the industry was too toxic. She tried to start a luxury candle business that consisted of her buying $5,000 worth of wax that sat in Karen's garage until it melted into a singular giant blob during a heat wave. When Brittany quit a job, her mother would sigh and say, "Oh, the poor thing. She's just so creative. Her spirit is too big for a 9 to 5. She needs time to heal." When I worked 21 days in a row without a break because we were short-staffed during peak violation season, Karen would say, "Well, you're so strong, Rachel. You're the responsible one. We don't worry about you." They said it like a compliment. It took me a long time to realize it was an exemption clause. Because they didn't worry about me. They didn't think about me. My stability gave them the luxury of ignoring my needs. The contrast wasn't just emotional. It was mathematical. I remembered my 26th birthday. I got the family's old Honda. It had 180,000 miles. The air conditioning only blew hot air. 2 years later, Brittany turned 26. I came home from a board meeting to find a brand new white Jeep Wrangler with a red bow parked in the driveway. "It's for safety," Karen had explained, seeing the look on my face. "Brittany isn't as careful a driver as you, Rachel. She needs something sturdy. Plus it holds its value." Brittany crashed it 3 months later. They bought her another one. I swallowed the bitterness. I told myself the story I needed to survive. I am the reliable one. I am the competent one. One day the math will matter. One day they will look at the spreadsheets and see that I am the asset and she is the liability. But as the years ground on, reliability started to feel less like a badge of honor and more like a target on my back. I became the fixer. If a resident got a bogus fine at 2 in the morning, my phone rang. I handled the appeal, the paperwork, the replacement vendor. If a client screamed because their pool arrived damaged, I was the one sent to the gate to face the firing squad. I apologized. I negotiated the discount. I personally drove back to fix it. And when the crisis was over, Karen would sweep in for the wrap-up meeting. She would shake the resident's hand, flash her charming smile, and say, "I'm glad we could make this right for you." At Maple Grove, we never leave a neighbor behind. The resident would leave happy, thinking Karen Whitaker was a miracle worker. I would be standing in the background holding the clipboard, invisible again. I remember one specific incident last year. We had snagged a massive city compliance contract for the annual inspection. It was a logistical nightmare. Temperature-controlled chemical delivery for the community pool across 6 blocks in 3 days. I spent 4 weeks designing the route. I built a custom tracking protocol so the residents could see the chemical levels in real time. I slept in the office for 3 nights during execution. It went perfectly. 0 loss, 0 delays. At the celebration potluck, the city inspector raised a glass to Karen. For having the vision and the operational genius to pull this off. You run a tight ship, Karen. I waited. I waited for her to point to me. I waited for her to say, "Actually, my board member built the system." Karen stood up, buttoned her jacket, and raised her glass. "Thank you. It's all about experience. You cannot teach instincts." She didn't look at me. She didn't mention my name. I sat there sipping my water and felt a cold realization wash over me. It wasn't that she forgot. It was that she believed it. She genuinely believed her leadership, which consisted of barking orders and taking long lunches, was the magic ingredient. She thought my work, my systems, my sleepless nights were just the automatic functions of the machine she owned. Brittany, on the other hand, was the artwork on the wall. She didn't have to do anything. Her value was in her existence. She was bright, bubbly, and projected the image of success that Karen desperately wanted the world to see. She was the Whitaker she wanted to be, carefree, rich, stylish. I was the Whitaker she actually was, tired, anxious, and grinding gears to keep the illusion moving. That night, driving home after the certificate snub, the question finally formed in my head. It was a terrifying question, one I had been avoiding for my entire adult life. I pulled into the driveway of my small townhouse. I turned off the ignition but didn't open the door. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were clean now, manicured, no longer stained with mulch, but I still felt the weight of that safety vest. If I stopped working, I thought, staring into the dark. If I stop fixing, stop saving, stop earning, if I stop being useful, am I still valued? Brittany could set a pile of dues money on fire and they would hug her and tell her it was a learning experience. If I made a rounding error, I was disappointing the board. They loved Brittany for her being. They loved me for my doing. And I was finally, after 30 years, too tired to do anymore. I got out of the car. The night air was cool. I walked up the stairs to my townhouse, unlocked the door, and walked straight to my laptop. The resignation letter was waiting. I wasn't just quitting a job. I was testing a hypothesis. I was about to remove the usefulness from the equation and see if there was anything left of the relationship. My finger hovered over the enter key. I thought about the gate at 4 in the morning. I thought about the broken Honda. I thought about the $150,000 salary for a girl who thought a violation notice was a type of duck. I pressed send. It was done. The engine had officially cut the fuel line. But as I sat back, watching the sent notification fade, I remembered the USB drive in my purse, the master compliance logic. I hadn't just quit. I had taken the keys to the kingdom. And tomorrow, when the sun came up, Karen Whitaker was going to try to start her perfect little community. And for the first time in her life, the engine wouldn't turn over. To understand why I walked away, you have to understand what I built. You have to understand that Maple Grove Estates was not a functioning neighborhood when I took over operations. It was a panic attack with a tax ID number. Before I implemented the systems, the board ran on what Karen called instincts and what I called gambling. Every morning was a roll of the dice. We had landscaping crews showing up to the wrong cul-de-sacs in the wrong weeks. We had expensive pool chemicals vanishing into the ether simply because someone forgot to write it down on a clipboard that had been missing since 2015. I remember the day that broke me. The day I decided instincts were going to bankrupt us. It was 3 years ago. We were handling the logistics for the annual city inspection. The inspector needed 40 custom chemical structures delivered by 6 in the morning. The trucks arrived at 8. 2 of them were empty. It turned out the previous operations person, a buddy of Karen's named Rick, had felt like the other 2 trucks were loaded because he saw them parked by the bay. He never checked inside. We paid $40,000 in penalty fees that day. We almost lost our certification forever. Karen laughed it off later, saying, "You win some, you lose some." I stopped laughing. I started coding. I spent the next 6 months turning myself into the most hated person in the neighborhood because I took away their freedom to be sloppy. I started with the inventory. I bought a thermal label printer and 3,000 rolls of high durability synthetic tags. I spent my weekends crawling over every lawn, every pool pump, every security camera. I tagged everything. If it was an asset worth more than $50, it got a barcode. I created a digital twin of the entire community on a server I set up in the back closet. I forced every board member and vendor to carry a scanner. If it doesn't beep, it doesn't leave. They complained. They called me the scan Nazi behind my back. They said I was slowing them down. Karen told me I was being too rigid, that I was killing the vibe. The vibe is costing us 12% of our annual dues in lost gear. Karen, I told her. The vibe is bleeding us dry. I didn't stop at the gear. I went after the routing. Before dispatching was done on a giant whiteboard that was half erased and totally illegible. A crew would get a call while already on the highway telling them to turn around because we forgot a pallet. I killed the whiteboard. I implemented dynamic routing software usually reserved for HOAs 10 times our size. I entered every variable manually: truck height, weight limits, vendor hours of service, traffic patterns, chemical prices. I created zones. Zone A was local. Zone B was regional. Zone C was emergency. I assigned vendors based on skill and fatigue levels, not just who raised their hand first. The results were violent. In the first quarter after the system went live, our lost equipment costs dropped to near zero. We stopped paying penalty fees for late arrivals because the software flagged potential delays 4 hours before they happened. Our insurance premiums dropped by 18% because I instituted a mandatory pre-trip safety checklist that had to be digitally signed before the engine could even turn over. No more, "I forgot to check the chemicals." If you didn't check the chemicals, the tablet wouldn't let you view your route. We started winning city contracts we had no business touching. We landed the logistics for the regional compliance audit, a 3-year deal worth $2 million. Solely because I could show their auditor a real-time audit trail of every single item in our custody. "Your chain of custody is tighter than the city's own," the auditor had told me. I brought that contract to Karen. I put it on her desk. "This covers the cost of the software, the scanners, and my salary for the next 10 years, I said. Karen smiled, signed the contract, and bought herself a new set of golf clubs. The next week, my title remained Operations Coordinator. My salary went up by a cost of living adjustment of 3%. There was no bonus. There was no profit sharing. There was no equity. "We're reinvesting in the community," Karen said. I knew reinvesting meant paying off the credit cards Brittany had maxed out, but I didn't say it. I just worked harder. That was when I decided to go back to school. I realized that if I wanted to be taken seriously, if I wanted to force Karen to see me as a partner and not a glorified secretary, I needed credentials that she couldn't argue with. I applied for the Certified Association Manager program. For 2 years, my life was a blur of caffeine and mulch fumes. I would work a 10-hour shift on the floor managing a crew of 30 vendors. Then at 6 in the evening, when the office lights went down, I would open my textbooks. I studied linear programming and statistical analysis while the cleaning crew vacuumed around my feet. I wrote my thesis on last-mile optimization in high-volatility community logistics. Sitting in the cab of a standby truck while waiting for a shipment to clear the gate at 2 in the morning, my laptop balanced on the steering wheel, the blue light illuminating the dark cabin. I was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. My body started sending signals that I was redlining. I developed a tremor in my left hand. My stomach was a knot of constant burning acid. I stopped eating lunch because the nausea was too intense. I lost 15 pounds I didn't have to lose. There was a Tuesday last November. It was peak violation season. We were managing 4 inspections simultaneously. I had been awake for 36 hours straight coordinating a crisis in the back block where a blizzard had shut down the main road. I was walking across the clubhouse floor to check a manifest when the world suddenly tilted sideways. The tile floor rushed up to meet me. My vision went white at the edges. I grabbed a railing, the cold metal digging into my palm, and held on for dear life. My knees buckled. One of the landscaping drivers, a guy named Miller, saw me. He killed his engine and ran over. "Rachel, you all right?" I couldn't speak for a moment. I just breathed, forcing air into lungs that felt too small. "I'm fine," I whispered. It was a lie. I was not fine. I was gray. Just stood up too fast. "Need some water?" Miller looked at me with genuine worry. "You look like a ghost." "Boss, go home. We got this." I didn't go home. I drank a bottle of water, ate a granola bar that tasted like cardboard, and went back to my desk. When Karen called me later that week and I mentioned I was tired, she gave me the same line she always did. "You're so strong, Rachel. You get that from your grandmother. We Whitakers are workhorses. You can handle it." It wasn't a compliment. It was a dismissal. By telling me I was strong, she was absolving herself of the need to help me. If I was strong, I didn't need rest. If I was strong, I didn't need fairness. Karen was even worse when I showed her the efficiency reports proving that my systems had doubled our throughput capacity without adding a single new vendor. She clapped me on the back. "That is the community spirit," she boomed. "This is why I trust you with the keys. Kiddo, you just get it done. You don't complain like the others." She loved the results. She loved the money. She loved the prestige of telling her country club friends that our HOA was tech-forward. But she didn't love the architect. I finished my certification. I walked across that stage. I handed her the business case for my raise, and she spat in my face. But the real breaking point wasn't the money. It was a moment just a day before I quit when I was showing Karen how to approve a complex override in the new system I had built. She was staring at the screen, glossing over. She waved her hand dismissively. "I don't need to learn this technical mumbo-jumbo, Rachel," she said, laughing. "That's why you're here. You're the only one who understands how this machine works. As long as you're here, I don't need to know a thing." She smiled at me, thinking she was giving me job security. But as I looked at her, I didn't feel secure. I felt the cold, hard click of a shackle. She wasn't telling me I was valuable. She was telling me I was trapped. She had built a cage out of my own competence, and she expected me to sit inside it and keep the lights on while she and Brittany played in the sun. "Only you understand this," she had said. I looked at the complex web of algorithms on the screen. She was right. Only I understood it, and that meant only I could take it apart. I didn't storm into Karen's office the morning after the certificate snub. That would have been emotional. And if there was one thing I had learned in 4 years of running an HOA operations floor, it was that emotion is the enemy of leverage. Emotion is how you make mistakes. Emotion is how you miss a decimal point or sign a bad contract. So I waited. I waited exactly 3 weeks. I watched the daily reports. I waited for a week where the numbers were perfect green across the board. 0 late deliveries, landscaping costs under budget, and a resident retention rate that had hit 99%. I wanted the backdrop of our conversation to be undeniable success. I wanted the silence of a smoothly running engine to be the soundtrack to my request. On a Tuesday morning, when the neighborhood was humming with the organized rhythm I had conducted, I sent a calendar invite to Karen. Subject: Operational Review and Compensation Adjustment. I walked into her office at 10 o'clock. She was in a good mood. She was looking at a brochure for a new boat, a 40-footer she had been eyeing for the summer season. "Morning, Rachel," she said, not closing the brochure. "Everything quiet on the streets?" "The streets are perfect, Karen," I said. "That's why I'm here." I sat down. I did not smile. I placed a single sheet of paper in front of her. It wasn't the thick binder from before. This was a summary, a 1-page executive brief. I had learned that Karen Whitaker did not read binders. She read headlines. "I want to discuss my future at Maple Grove Estates," I began. My voice was level, practiced. "I have just completed my SAM certification. I have absorbed the role of operations director for the last 4 years without the title. I have managed the finances, the vendors, and the personnel." I pointed to the paper. "This is a market analysis of my position." I pulled data from 3 major salary aggregators and compared them with similar-sized HOAs in the Midwest. The median salary for an operations director with a CAM and my level of experience is $135,000 a year. Karen finally closed the boat brochure. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes flickering over the paper for less than a second before landing back on me. She looked amused. I am currently making $45,000, I continued. That is roughly $17 an hour if I worked a standard 40-hour week. But I don't work 40 hours. I average 72 hours a week. That brings my actual hourly wage down to something closer to $12. The landscaping crews make $20. I am proposing a salary adjustment to $110,000. That is still 20% below market rate. I am also asking for a defined bonus structure tied to net profit, which I have directly influenced by cutting overhead by 15% this year. I stopped. I had made the business case. It was logical. It was fair. It was undeniable. Karen leaned back in her chair. The leather creaked loudly in the silence. She took off her reading glasses and folded them slowly. You have been busy with your calculator, she said. Her tone wasn't impressed. It was dry. I am an operations coordinator, I said. Calculators are my tools. You are looking at this all wrong. Rachel, Karen said, shaking her head with a pitying smile. You are looking at this like a transaction, like you are some consultant I hired off the street. I am an employee, Karen. Employment is a transaction. No, she snapped, her voice suddenly hard. You are family. This is not a corporation where you punch a clock and demand a check. This is a legacy. You are building something that will be yours one day. You cannot put a price tag on that kind of opportunity. I cannot pay my mortgage with opportunity, I said, and I cannot buy groceries with a legacy that might happen 20 years from now. I am 30 years old. I have debts. Debts you chose to take on, Karen countered. She waved a hand at the air as if dismissing my entire certification. That CAM degree, I did not ask for that. I did not tell you to go spend 2 years reading books. You did that for yourself. You did that for your ego. Do not bring me the bill for a hobby I did not approve. I felt a cold flush of heat rise up my neck. A hobby. She called a degree in community association management, the very science that kept her perfect little kingdom from collapsing, a hobby. That degree is the reason we passed the city audit last month, I said, keeping my voice steady. That degree is the reason I knew how to restructure the chemical contracts when prices spiked. It is not a hobby. It is an asset and you are using it for free. Karen stood up. She walked over to the window that overlooked the neighborhood streets. She stood there for a long moment, watching the landscaping trucks zip back and forth. Trucks moving on the routes I designed, carrying chemicals I had tracked. You are acting like an outsider, Rachel, she said without turning around. You come in here with your charts and your demands, talking about market rates and industry standards. You sound like one of those headhunters who try to poach my vendors. She turned to face me. Her face was red. You think you are so special because you went to school. You think that makes you better than me? I built this place with a high school diploma and sweat. I did not need a piece of paper to tell me how to run a community. I never said I was better, I said. I said I am valuable and I am tired. Karen, I am burnt out. I need to know that there is a future here that reflects my contribution. I cannot keep working 70 hours a week for $12 an hour. It is not sustainable. Karen laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. Sustainable? She mocked. You millennials and your burnout. You have a desk job. Rachel, you sit in air conditioning. You want to see burnout? Go talk to the guys in the yard who are throwing 50-pound bags of mulch in the heat. That is work. You are just managing. She walked back to her desk and sat down, opening her email on her screen. She started typing, signaling that the meeting was over. I am not giving you a raise, she said, her eyes on the screen. We are putting money back into the community. We have expenses coming up. If you need money, maybe you should cut back on your lifestyle. Move into a cheaper place. Sell that fancy laptop. I sat frozen. My lifestyle. I lived in a 2-bedroom townhouse. I drove a 10-year-old car. I hadn't taken a vacation in 4 years. Is that your final answer? I asked. Karen stopped typing. She looked at me over the top of her monitor. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any neighborly warmth. There was only the president looking at a troublesome subordinate. Let me give you some advice, Rachel. You think you are a hot commodity because you have that degree, but out there in the real world, you are nobody. You are a 30-year-old woman with no experience outside of her neighborhood's HOA. No one is going to hire you. No one is going to pay you 6 figures to run a spreadsheet. She leaned forward. You are here because I allow you to be here. You have a role because I created one for you. If you are not happy with my generosity, then go ahead. Go out there and try. See what the market thinks of you. It wasn't advice. It was a dare. It was a threat. She was betting on my insecurity. She was banking on the fact that she had spent my entire adult life making me feel small, making me feel like I was only competent because she held the safety net. She thought I was bluffing. She thought I would fold, apologize, and go back to my desk to work another 12-hour day to prove my loyalty. I stood up. I did not scream. I did not throw the paper at her. I reached out and picked up the single sheet of market analysis. I folded it neatly in half, then in half again. Okay, I said. Okay what? Karen asked, already looking back at her screen. Okay, I repeated. I understand the position. Good, she muttered. Now, close the door on your way out. I have real work to do. I walked out of the office. I walked past the dispatch desk. I walked past the break room. I walked out the front door and into the parking lot. I got into my car. It was hot inside, the sun baking the dashboard. I sat there with my hands in my lap. I didn't cry. I expected to cry. I expected to feel devastated that the woman I had given a decade to had just confirmed to my face that she saw me as a charity case rather than a partner. But the tears didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange hollow clarity. It was like the moment after a fever breaks. The heat was gone, leaving only a cool, sharp awareness. She had told me to go try. She had told me I was unhireable. She had told me my value was 0. She was wrong. I looked at the clubhouse building one last time. It didn't look like a legacy. It didn't look like a community. It looked like a building full of problems that I was no longer paid to solve. I started the car and drove away. 2 days passed. I went to work. I did my job. I was silent. I was efficient. I was the machine she wanted me to be. Then, on Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, a notification popped up on my screen. It was an email from Karen. It was sent to the entire neighborhood. Subject: Exciting updates. Leadership team expansion. I stared at the subject line. My stomach dropped. I knew with a sickening instinct that this was her answer. This was her retaliation. I had dared to ask for my worth. And now she was going to show me exactly where I stood in the hierarchy. I clicked open the email and I realized that the war had officially begun. The email Karen sent on Friday was not an invitation. It was a summon. All residents mandatory assembly. Clubhouse floor. 3 p.m. At 2:55 the neighborhood machinery fell silent. The hum of the landscaping mowers died down. The beep 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 of reversing trucks ceased and the heavy roll-up doors were lowered to half-mast to cut the glare of the afternoon sun. The silence was unnatural in a community hub. Silence usually meant something was broken. I walked out of my office and joined the rest of the neighbors. There were about 70 of us standing in the main hall. I stood next to Sarah, my lead dispatcher, and Miller, the yard foreman. Miller was wiping grease off his hands with a red shop rag, looking annoyed. "This better be quick," Miller muttered to me. "I have 3 crews inbound from the back block that need to be turned around by 5. Just listen and smile," I said quietly. Karen walked out onto the floor. She had set up a microphone and a small portable speaker, the kind you would use for a backyard barbecue. It gave a tiny hollow quality to her voice. "Team," Karen started, tapping the mic. "Can you hear me? Good. I gathered you all here because Maple Grove is hitting a milestone. We are growing. We are evolving. And with growth comes the need for new vision." She paused for effect. The residents shifted their weight. They were paying dues by the month, not by the hour for listening to speeches. "We have mastered the logistics," Karen said, waving a hand vaguely in my direction without actually looking at me. "We mow lawns. We do it well. But mowing lawns is yesterday's game. Tomorrow is about experience. It is about the feeling our residents get when they choose Maple Grove." I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. Experienced residents didn't want an experience. They wanted their grass mowed without being fined for breathing. They wanted boring, predictable reliability. To lead this charge, Karen beamed, I am thrilled to announce our new Director of Community Harmony. She is going to bring a fresh, dynamic energy to our front-facing operations. Please welcome Brittany Whitaker. The door to the administrative wing opened. Brittany walked out. If the setting wasn't so grim, it would have been comical. The clubhouse floor was stained tile, dusty, and gray. The staff wore safety vests, steel-toed boots, and jeans worn white at the knees. Brittany was wearing a white blazer that looked like it had never seen a speck of dust in its life. She wore designer jeans and, most absurdly, 3-inch stiletto heels. Click, click, click. The sound of her heels on the tile was sharp and distinct in the quiet hall. Every eye tracked her. Miller looked down at her feet, then at the OSHA safety line painted on the floor that mandated closed-toe. Non-slip footwear. And then he looked at me. He raised an eyebrow. I stared straight ahead. Brittany took the mic from Karen. She was beaming. She looked like she was accepting an award, not starting a job. "Hi, everyone," she chirped. "Wow, it is so earthy in here. I love the vibe. It is so industrial chic." A few of the younger families exchanged confused glances. Earthy. It smelled like diesel and sweat. "I am so excited to jump in," Brittany continued, using her hands to emphasize her words. "I have been looking at our brand and I see so much potential for storytelling. We are not just enforcing rules. We are enforcing dreams. We are enforcing the future. I want to create a synergy between our logistics and our lifestyle." Synergy, storytelling, lifestyle. She was speaking a language that meant absolutely nothing to the men and women standing in front of her. These were people who worried about weigh stations and DOT inspections for the big trucks. They didn't care about the story of the grass. They cared about the weight of it. "I will be setting up meetings with all the team leads soon to brainstorm how we can elevate our visual identity," Brittany finished. "Let's make Maple Grove pop." There was a pause. Then Karen started clapping. The residents followed suit. A polite, confused ripple of applause that died out quickly. "All right, back to work," Karen shouted, clearly thinking this was a morale booster. As the crowd dispersed, the murmur of conversation started up. It wasn't angry. That was the thing that stung the most. They didn't hate Brittany. They just didn't respect her. They viewed her as a curiosity, a mascot that Karen had bought. They looked at her the same way they looked at the new coffee machine in the break room. Something shiny that would probably break in a month. But they looked at me with pity. I turned to go back to my office, but Karen caught my arm. She was smiling, high on the adrenaline of her performance. "Great kickoff, right?" she asked. "She has got a spark. Rachel, you have to admit it. She's wearing high heels on a clubhouse floor." "Karen," I said, "that is an insurance liability." Karen rolled her eyes. "Always the safety monitor. Lighten up. She is not carrying bags of mulch. She is carrying the image." I stopped. We were standing near the loading dock. just out of earshot of the crew, but close enough that I could see Miller watching us from the corner of his eye. "You really gave her the package?" I said. It wasn't a question. "We discussed this," Karen said, her smile fading. "I need to hear you say it, Karen, because I need to understand the logic. You told me 3 days ago that the community was too cash poor to bring me to market rate. You told me 110,000 was impossible." Karen sighed, checking her watch. "Rachel, but you just hired a director of community harmony at 150,000. I said, "Plus the golf cart, plus the expense account, plus the assistant. That is $250,000 in new overhead. Where did that money come from?" Karen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a low hiss. "It is an investment. Brittany brings in new residents. You just manage what we already have. You are maintenance. She is growth. Growth costs money." "I am not maintenance," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. "I am the reason you have a profit margin to spend on her. I built the engine she is going to put stickers on." Karen looked at me, then really looked at me, and for the first time she didn't hide her contempt. "You are good at execution, Rachel. I will give you that. You are a grinder. You can stare at a spreadsheet for 10 hours and not blink. But leadership, real leadership, that is about energy. It is about attitude. It is about walking into a room and making people believe in you." She gestured toward Brittany, who was currently taking a selfie with a landscaping truck. "She has that. You do not. You are cold, Rachel. You are rigid. You kill the vibe. That is why she is worth 3 times what you are, because people like her. You cannot put a price on likability." I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't about the degree. It wasn't about the hours. It wasn't about the competence. It was personal. She was punishing me for being the serious one. She was punishing me for being the one who told her no when she wanted to spend community money on toys. She was punishing me for being the adult in a neighborhood of children. She called it lack of energy. I called it exhaustion from cleaning up their messes. "I understand," I said. "Good," Karen said, patting my shoulder. "Now, help her get set up with the email system. She is locked out of her account." She walked away. I stood there for a moment. The neighborhood noise washed over me. The beep of the scanners, the roar of the engines, the shout of men moving heavy things. This was my symphony. I had composed it, and now I was being told I wasn't charismatic enough to conduct it. I walked back to my office. I sat down. It was 3:30. I did not storm out. I did not delete files. I did not scream. I worked. I processed the final batch of violation notices for the week. I approved the vendor schedule for the weekend. I responded to an email from a resident in the back block about a potential delay. I was professional. I was precise. I was perfect. At 5 o'clock, the office staff started to leave. "Have a good weekend, Rachel," the receptionist called out. "You too," I said. At 5:30, the building was mostly quiet, save for the skeleton crew on the dock. I opened my personal email on my laptop. I pulled up the draft I had written days ago. Subject: Resignation, Rachel Bennett. Dear Mrs. Whitaker, please accept this letter as formal notification of my resignation from my position as operations coordinator effective 2 weeks from today. I will do my best to ensure a smooth transition of my duties during this period. Sincerely, Rachel Bennett. It was short. It was dry. It was exactly the kind of cold, rigid communication Karen claimed to hate. I attached a document titled Transition Outline PDF. It was a list of my daily tasks. It was 10 pages long. I hit send. Then I closed my laptop, put it in my bag, and stood up. I walked out of my office and turned off the lights. As I walked down the hallway, I passed the break room. Sarah, the lead dispatcher, and Miller were sitting there drinking coffee. They weren't supposed to be there. Their shifts ended 30 minutes ago. They looked up when I walked in. They knew. I didn't have to say it. They had seen Karen yelling at me in the office earlier in the week. They had seen the look on my face during the meeting. In a small community, there are no secrets. You did it, didn't you? Sarah asked softly. I nodded. I just sent the email. Miller put his coffee cup down. We're going to miss you, boss. The first sign of the collapse was not an explosion. It was a font change. 2 weeks after I started at Elite Community Solutions, sitting in my glass-walled office overlooking the Chicago skyline, I received a photo text from Miller. It was a picture of the side of a Maple Grove landscaping truck. The old blocky, reliable navy blue lettering was gone. In its place was a swooping abstract silver shape that looked vaguely like a bird or perhaps a plane crashing. Underneath it, in a thin minimalist typeface, were the words, Maple Grove Estates Reimagined. Miller had added a caption, cost $25,000 to repaint the fleet. Meanwhile, Truck 19 needs a new transmission, and we are just topping off the fluid every morning. I stared at the image. It was the perfect summary of the new regime. Brittany was prioritizing the wrapper over the candy. She was spending community dues on the things people saw while starving the things that made the neighborhood work. From my vantage point in Chicago, I watched the dominoes begin to fall. I didn't need a spy. I just needed to watch the market. It started with the streamlining. That was Brittany's favorite word. She decided that the rigorous inventory checks I had implemented, the scan-in, scan-out protocol that required every chemical pallet to be verified before it left the dock, were friction points. We need to be agile, she reportedly told the team. We trust our people. We do not need to police them with scanners every 5 minutes. So the scanners were shelved. The barcodes I had spent months applying started to peel off and nobody replaced them. The warehouse went back to the honor system. In HOA logistics, the honor system is just a fancy term for lost cargo. Within 3 weeks, the error rate spiked. A crate of pool chemicals meant for the main recreation center ended up in a warehouse in Cleveland. A pallet of turf grass was marked as shipped but was found 3 days later sitting behind a dumpster in the Maple Grove yard. But Brittany didn't see these as systemic failures. She saw them as isolated incidents, bad luck or negative energy from the staff. I heard about the positivity meeting from Sarah. Brittany had gathered the dispatchers and vendors in the break room. She had printed out colorful posters with slogans like, Solutions, not problems, and Manifest your mulch. We are hearing a lot of we can't lately, Brittany had told them, pacing back and forth in her designer heels. When a resident asks for a delivery window, we do not say we can't make that. We say let's make it happen. We need to be a yes community. Miller had raised his hand. We are saying we can't because the vendors are maxing out their legal hours. Brittany, if we push them, we violate DOT regulations. We get fined or someone falls asleep at the wheel. Brittany had sighed. A sound of profound disappointment. That is a very limiting mindset, Miller. We need to be creative with the logs. We need to be flexible. Creative with the logs. That is federal fraud. Because I had severed the personal guarantee on the credit line, cash flow was becoming a stranglehold. The bank had frozen the revolving credit just as my new lawyer Jessica had predicted. Karen had to scramble to put up personal assets, likely leveraging the house or her new boat to get the fuel cards turned back on. But the liquidity was gone. Vendors smelled blood. The truck repair shop that used to give us net 30 payment terms now demanded payment on delivery. The temp agencies that supplied extra labor for big loads started refusing to send bodies until past invoices were cleared. So Brittany stopped doing maintenance. If the truck starts, it runs became the unwritten rule. Oil changes were skipped. Tire rotations were ignored. The fleet, which I had kept in pristine condition, began to groan. Then came the crown jewel. It was the annual Regional Compliance Expo. This was the contract I had won 3 years ago, the one that paid the bills for the entire third quarter. It was a massive high-stakes operation involving the transport of multimillion-dollar inspection equipment to the convention center in downtown Indianapolis. The client, the city, was demanding. They required white glove service, climate-controlled transport, and a setup window that was razor-thin. I knew this contract inside and out. I knew that you needed 4 crews, not 2. I knew you needed the air ride suspension trucks, not the standard springs, or the vibration would decalibrate the equipment. I knew you needed to stage the trucks in the marshalling yard at 3 in the morning to beat the union labor queue. Brittany didn't know any of this, and because she had alienated Miller and Sarah, they stopped trying to tell her. She saw the contract value, $200,000, and she saw a chance to prove she was a rainmaker. She double-booked the fleet to maximize revenue. She scheduled the City Expo on the same weekend as a massive pop-up vibe installation for a new influencer resident, a cool client she had courted on Instagram. She promised both clients full attention. She promised both clients the A-team. There was only one A-team. On the Friday before the expo, the cracks turned into a canyon. I was in my office at Elite Community Solutions when my phone rang. It was the logistics manager for the city. He didn't know I had left Maple Grove. He had my personal number from our years of working together. "Rachel, where the hell are the trucks?" he shouted. "The marshalling yard opened 40 minutes ago. Our slot is vanishing. If we miss the dock time, the union stewards are going to push us to the back of the line. We will miss the opening keynote." I felt a phantom panic, a reflex to jump up and fix it. Then I remembered whose circus this was. "I'm sorry, David," I said calmly. "I do not work for Maple Grove anymore. You need to call their main dispatch line." There was a silence on the other end. A heavy, terrified silence. "You left. Oh my God. That explains why the woman on the phone told me to trust the universe when I asked for a GPS ETA." "I'm sorry," I repeated. I hung up, but I couldn't look away. I pulled up the industry forums on my second monitor. News travels faster than light in HOA logistics. The threads were already starting. User indie rigging. Anyone else at the convention center seeing the disaster at Bay 4? Maple Grove truck just showed up with a blown radiator leaking coolant all over the loading ramp. Hazmat team is shutting down the lane. User expo manager. It gets worse. They open the back. No straps. The load shifted. I heard the crash from the mezzanine. I closed my eyes. No straps. Brittany had probably told them straps were overkill or took too long. The disaster was unfolding in real time. Because Brittany had prioritized the influencer client, she had sent the best trucks and the most experienced drivers to the pop-up event. She had sent the older trucks, the ones with the skipped maintenance, to the City Expo, and she had staffed them with temp labor because the regular crews were double-booked. The truck with the blown radiator was just the beginning. 2 hours later, a second truck arrived. This one was carrying the custom inspection truss for the main booth. When the crew opened the doors, the truss wasn't there. It was sitting in a warehouse in Ohio. The honor system inventory check had failed. The driver had grabbed the wrong pallet, a pallet of generic pipe and drape instead of the custom aluminum grid. The city had a booth that cost $500,000 to design, and they had no lights. The penalty clauses in the city contract were savage. I knew because I had negotiated them. For every hour of delay, the penalty was $5,000. If the booth wasn't ready by opening, the penalty was the full cost of the contract plus damages. By noon, the damage was estimated at $50,000. By 2 o'clock, the city's legal team had sent a breach of contract notice. And then Karen arrived. I heard this part from Miller later that night. Miller had been on the scene driving one of the few functional trucks, trying to salvage what he could. Karen rolled up in her Mercedes, wearing a suit, looking like a stateswoman coming to survey a minor inconvenience. She walked onto the loading dock, stepping over the puddle of coolant that was being soaked up with kitty litter. "All right, everyone, calm down," Karen had shouted, flashing her famous smile. "We are going to sort this out. Minor hiccups. Let's just get the gear inside, shall we?" The city VP of operations was standing there. He was purple with rage. "Minor hiccup?" the VP screamed. "My inspection robot is recalibrated because your driver hit a pothole in a truck with bad shocks. My lighting rig is in another state, and your director won't answer her phone." Karen looked around. "Where is Brittany?" Brittany wasn't there. She was at the influencer pop-up taking photos for Instagram. "I will handle this," Karen said, puffing out her chest. "I am taking command. Miller, get me the routing manifest. I want to see where the backup truck is." Miller just looked at him. "There is no routing manifest." "Karen, what do you mean?" "Check the system. Check the file." "The file is gone," Miller said. "Brittany had it archived because it was old data. We are running on paper tickets and the driver with the backup truck timed out on his hours an hour ago. He is parked at a rest stop 30 miles away. He legally cannot move until tomorrow morning." Karen stared at him. She pulled out her phone. "I will override it. I will authorize the overtime." "You cannot override federal law with a phone call, Karen," Miller said, his voice tired and heavy with the weight of the day. "And even if you could, we do not have the parts. The inventory count was wrong. The system says we have spares. The shelf is empty." Karen stood there, surrounded by the chaos of the loading dock, the shouting teamsters, the furious client, the leaking truck. She looked at her phone, then at the empty truck, then at Miller. For the first time, the reality pierced her delusion. She had always believed that the neighborhood ran on her personality. She thought the trucks moved because she ordered them to. She thought the residents stayed because she bought them steak dinners. She didn't realize that the neighborhood ran on a million tiny invisible details: the maintenance schedules, the routing logic, the inventory audits, the compliance checks. She didn't realize that those details were a language she didn't speak. She turned to the city VP. "Jim, look, we go way back. Let me make a call." "Don't call anyone," Jim said, his voice icy. "Get your junk off my dock. We are hiring Elite Community Solutions to bring in emergency gear. And Karen, you will be hearing from our lawyers about the equipment damage." Karen watched as the Elite Community Solutions trucks, my new trucks, started to roll into the adjacent bay. Clean, on time, and professional. She looked for someone to blame. She looked for someone to fix it. She looked for me. But I wasn't there. I was 200 miles away reviewing a successful quarterly report while Karen Whitaker stood in the wreckage of her own arrogance, holding a set of keys to a machine that had stopped working the moment I walked out the door. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening, 3 days after the City Expo disaster. I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment in Chicago, watching the city lights flicker like a distant, silent server room. I had a glass of wine in my hand and a spreadsheet open on my lap. But I wasn't working. I was just breathing. When the screen lit up with the name Karen, I didn't feel the old spike of adrenaline. I didn't feel the urge to answer immediately, to apologize for missing the call, to ask what was wrong. I just stared at it. I let it ring 4 times before I slid my thumb across the glass. "Hello, Karen," I said. There was a pause on the other end. She wasn't used to being called by her first name. It was a small boundary, a brick in the wall I was building. "Rachel," she said. Her voice sounded ragged, like she had been shouting for hours and was now running on fumes. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," I said. "The city situation, it is a mess," she admitted. It was the closest she had ever come to an apology, though she didn't actually say the word. "The lawyers are all over us. The insurance company is threatening to drop coverage because of the negligence claim on the strapping. We are bleeding." I heard, I said calmly. It sounds expensive. It is not just money, Karen snapped, her patience fraying instantly. It is the reputation. It is the legacy. Look, I am willing to overlook the way you left. I am willing to put it behind us. We need you back. Just for a few months. Just to steady the ship until we get through this quarterly crisis. I took a sip of wine. Overlook the way I left. She was still framing this as my transgression. As if my resignation was a teenage tantrum rather than a strategic exit from a burning building. I have a job, Karen, I said. A full-time job. I am the regional director for Elite Community Solutions. I cannot just come back. Take a leave of absence, she demanded. Tell them you have a family emergency because you do. This is your community, Rachel. We are drowning here. I can offer consulting services, I said. I had prepared for this moment. I switched into business mode. But the terms will be different. I am not coming back as an employee. I will come back as an external crisis management consultant. Fine. Fine. Whatever you want to call it, Karen said dismissively. Just get down here tomorrow. We need to discuss the rate and the scope first, I said. Rate. Karen laughed. A dry, incredulous sound. Rachel, stop playing games. You come in, you fix the routing, you talk to the vendors. We will put you back on payroll at your old salary plus, say, 10%. That is generous considering the circumstances. I nearly dropped my glass. My old salary was $45,000. You want me to fix $1 million liability for $22 an hour? It is temporary, Karen shouted. Here are my terms. I cut over her. My voice was ice. My consulting rate is $250 an hour. Minimum retainer of 20 hours a week. Paid up front. And I need a signed contract stating that I have full operational autonomy. That means I have the authority to override anyone on the floor, including Brittany. There was a silence on the line, a heavy, suffocating silence. You want to charge your own neighborhood president $250 an hour? Karen whispered. After everything I gave you, I put a roof over your head. I gave you your first role, and now when I'm on my knees, you want to send me a bill. I am charging the market rate for a specialist, I said. Actually, I am giving you a discount. Elite Community Solutions bills my time out to clients at $400 an hour. This is family, Karen roared. The sound distorted the speaker on my phone. Family does not count hours. Family does not write contracts. We help each other because that is what we do. No, I said. Family does not call exploitation loyalty, Karen. You paid Brittany $150,000 to crash the neighborhood. You can pay me a fraction of that to save it, or you can let it burn. It is a business decision. You are cold, she spat. You are unrecognizable. I am a professional, I said. Let me know if you want the contract. I hung up. My hand was shaking just a little. It wasn't fear. It was the aftershock of cutting a cord that had been wrapped around my neck for 30 years. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Mom, this was the second wave. The good cop. The guilt. Rachel. Her voice was wet. She had been crying. Oh, Rachel, why are you doing this to Karen? She is sitting at the kitchen table holding her head. She looks so old. Honey, I am scared she's going to have a heart attack. I closed my eyes. This was the weapon they always used. Karen's health, Karen's stress. As if her blood pressure was my responsibility to manage. I'm sorry she is stressed. Mom, I said gently. But she created this situation. She hired Brittany. She ignored the safety protocols. Brittany is just a girl, my mother pleaded. She made a mistake. She is trying so hard. She is crying in her room right now because she feels like she let everyone down. You are the big sister, Rachel. You are supposed to fix it. That is what you do. I am not the fixer anymore, I said. Think about the others. She pivoted. Think about Miller. Think about Sarah. If the neighborhood goes under, they lose their pensions. They lose their health insurance. Miller has that baby on the way. Can you really live with yourself knowing you could have saved their jobs, but you didn't because you were too proud to help? The knife twisted. She knew exactly where to aim. She knew I loved the crew. She knew I felt a deep protective obligation to the people who actually did the work. If Miller loses his job, I said, my voice hardening, it is because Karen and Brittany drove the neighborhood into a wall. It is not because I refuse to be the airbag. They are adults, Mom. They made decisions. Now they have to pay the price for them. I don't know who you are anymore, she sobbed. Money has changed you. Money hasn't changed me, I said. It just gave me the ability to say no. I hung up again. I turned off my phone. I sat in the dark for a long time listening to the city. I felt like a villain. That is the insidious thing about toxic communities. They train you to believe that protecting yourself is an act of aggression. 2 days later, Karen emailed me. Subject: meeting request. Rachel, let's meet halfway. There is a coffee shop in Millville Thursday at 10. I want to discuss a formal arrangement. I drove to Millville. It was neutral ground, an hour from Chicago and an hour from the neighborhood. Karen was sitting in a booth when I arrived. She looked terrible. Her skin was gray, her eyes sunken. She was wearing a suit, but the collar was unbuttoned, her scarf loose. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept in a week. For a second, my heart broke. She was my president. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to tell her I would come back and fix the routing and call the insurance company and make the bad noise go away. But then I saw the folder on the table. I sat down. I didn't order coffee. I drew this up, Karen said, sliding a document toward me. It is a letter of intent. It outlines a new role for you. Senior Vice President of Operations. I opened the folder. The title was there. Senior Vice President. The salary was there. $120,000. It was close to what I had asked for initially, though still below my current pay at Elite. But I skipped the numbers. I looked for the reporting structure. I found it on page 2, paragraph 3. The Senior Vice President of Operations will oversee logistical execution and vendor maintenance. This role will work in tandem with the strategic vision of the community and will report to the Director of Community Harmony for all client-facing prioritization and brand alignment. I stared at the sentence. Report to the Director of Community Harmony. Report to Brittany. They still didn't get it, even now with the ship taking on water, with the lawsuits piling up, with the vendors revolting. They were still trying to protect the hierarchy. They wanted my brain, but they wanted Brittany to hold the leash. They wanted me to do the work, but they wanted Brittany to have the final say on prioritization, which meant she could still double-book trucks if she thought it was good for the brand. I closed the folder. No, I said. Karen looked stunned. What? Did you read the title? It is VP. Rachel. It is what you wanted. I read the reporting line, I said. You want me to report to Brittany? It is a dotted line, Karen argued. It is just for coordination. She handles the residents. You handle the trucks. You have to be on the same page. She is the face of the community, Rachel. You cannot undermine her. She is incompetent. Karen, I said. I said it loudly enough that the barista looked over. She is the reason you are in this mess. And you want me to ask her permission to do my job? You want me to let a 27-year-old influencer decide which trucks are safe to drive? She is learning. Karen slammed her hand on the table. Why are you so jealous of her? I am not jealous, I said, standing up. I am terrified of her. She is dangerous and you are enabling her. I pushed the folder back across the table. I offered you a consulting deal. You rejected it. This offer insults my intelligence. I am done. Karen, Do not call me again unless it is through a lawyer. I walked out of the coffee shop. I got in my car and drove back to Chicago. My knuckles white on the steering wheel. I was shaking with rage. They were willing to burn the whole thing down rather than admit that the golden child was flawed. But the real blow came the next week. I was in the break room at Elite Community Solutions getting a coffee. Elias Thorne walked in. He looked uncomfortable. "Rachel, got a minute?" "Sure," I said. "I wanted you to hear this from me," Elias said, leaning against the counter. "I was at the Regional HOA Association dinner last night. I sat next to the VP of the City Compliance Office. My stomach tightened. "Okay, there is a rumor going around," Elias said quietly. "The word is that the City Expo disaster happened because you sabotaged the routing system before you left. People are saying you deleted the files and scrambled the inventory codes as revenge for being passed over for a promotion." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That is a lie. I archived the files. I handed everything over." "I know that," Elias said. "I have seen your work. But the narrative out there, it is ugly. Rachel, they are saying you were fired for being uncooperative and difficult and that you retaliated by destroying community property. Karen is telling people she is heartbroken that her board member would do this to the neighborhood." I stood frozen. It was Brittany. It had to be. This was her brand of warfare. She couldn't fix the trucks, so she fixed the story. She was rewriting history to make herself the victim and me the villain. She was using my departure to explain away her incompetence. Rachel broke the system. Rachel deleted the files. Poor Brittany is just trying to pick up the pieces. It was a smear campaign. And in a tight-knit industry like ours, reputation was everything. If people believed I was vindictive, that I would sabotage a client just to spite the president, my career would be over. No one trusts a rogue operator. Elias watched me closely. I did not validate it. Obviously. I told them you have been exemplary here, but mud sticks. Rachel, you might want to get ahead of this. "Thank you for telling me," I said. My voice was calm, but inside I was nuclear. I went back to my office. I locked the door. I sat at my desk and stared at the Chicago skyline. They had crossed the final line. They hadn't just exploited me. Now they were trying to destroy me to save face. They were willing to torch my professional future to cover up Brittany's mess. I didn't cry. I didn't call Karen to scream. I didn't post a defensive rant on LinkedIn. I opened my laptop. I went to my personal cloud storage. I opened the folder marked Maple Grove Archives. Inside was the transition log PDF. It contained timestamps of every file I handed over. It contained screenshots of the system health on my last day showing everything was green. Everything was organized. But more importantly, I had the audit trail. I had the logs showing exactly who accessed the system after I left. I had the logs showing the command executed by user B. Whitaker on the Tuesday before the expo. Command: delete archive batch 04. Command: disable mandatory validation. I had proof. Digital. Time-stamped. Irrefutable proof that Brittany had deleted the routing maps herself. Likely because she didn't know what they were and wanted to clean up the desktop. I looked at the file. If I released this, it wouldn't just clear my name. It would expose them. It would show the world that Karen was a liar and Brittany was grossly negligent. It would humiliate them publicly. I had spent my life protecting them. I had spent my life keeping their secrets, fixing their mistakes, hiding their flaws. I hovered my mouse over the attach button on a new email draft to Ethics Committee HOA Association or cclegal@citycompliance.gov. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to let the truth do what it does best. I was going to let it destroy the lie. The war for the soul of Maple Grove Estates did not happen on a battlefield. It happened in the quiet, desperate corners of text messages and the sterile legal language of compliance audits. 2 weeks after I declined Karen's insulting offer to return as a subordinate to her daughter, Brittany launched her final offensive. She realized that she could not fix the logistics, so she decided to buy the loyalty I had earned over 4 years. It started with Miller. I was sitting in my office at Elite Community Solutions reviewing a route map for a heavy haul corridor through the Dakotas when my personal phone buzzed. It was Miller. He never called during shift hours unless something was on fire. "Rachel," he said, his voice low. I could hear the echo of the warehouse behind him. "I need you to be straight with me always." "Miller, what is going on?" "Brittany just pulled me into her office," he said. "She offered me a promotion. Director of Fleet Maintenance. She offered me $85,000 a year. That is a $30,000 bump. Rachel, she said she wants to lock in the core talent." I closed my eyes. 85,000. Karen barely had enough liquidity to keep the diesel tanks full. "Miller," I said carefully, "did she give you that in writing?" "She gave me an offer letter," he said. "But she said the raise kicks in next quarter. She said they are waiting for a capital injection to clear." "There is no capital injection," I said. "The bank froze the credit line when I pulled my guarantee. They are bleeding cash. She is buying time with money she does not have. She is terrified you are going to leave, and she is promising you a future that does not exist." There was a long silence on the line. "I have a baby coming, Rachel," Miller whispered. "I want to believe her. 85,000. That changes my life." "I know," I said, and my heart ached for him. "But ask yourself this. If they could not pay me market rate when I was running the whole show, how can they pay you that much when they are losing clients every day? It is bait. Miller, do not sign a non-compete. Do not sign anything that locks you in." "She is hitting Sarah too," Miller said. "And the lead rigger. She is throwing big numbers at everyone who knows how the system works. She is trying to rebuild the brain she drove away," I said. "But she is using monopoly money." "Thanks, Rachel," Miller said. "I think I'm going to call your cousin at FedEx." I hung up. I felt a surge of cold anger. Brittany was playing with people's livelihoods now. She was weaponizing their hope against their survival. But while Brittany was trying to bribe the crew, the machinery of the industry was coming for the neighborhood. The next blow was not one I struck. It was self-inflicted, born of pure arrogance. When I was the operations coordinator, I had negotiated a strict enterprise license for our scheduling software, Logit. It was expensive software charged by the seat, meaning we paid for every unique user who had administrative access. To save money, I had limited the admin seats to 3: me, Karen, and the lead dispatcher. Everyone else had view-only access. After I left, Brittany apparently found the permission settings too restrictive. She didn't want to wait for a dispatcher to approve a route change. She wanted everyone to be empowered. So she went into the admin panel using Karen's password, since she didn't have her own, and she granted administrative rights to 15 different users. She gave full access to the sales team, the interns, and her assistant. She didn't read the contract. Logit had an automated audit bot. When it detected a 300% spike in administrative users on a small business license, it didn't send a warning. It sent an invoice and a cease and desist. I found out because Karen tried to blame me. I received an email from Maple Grove's external counsel forwarded to my lawyer Jessica. Subject: Software Violation Liability Claim. MS. Bennett. Maple Grove Estates is currently facing a penalty of $42,000 from Logit Systems for license violations. Mrs. Whitaker asserts that you set up the account architecture and that these violations are a result of your legacy configuration. We are seeking indemnification for this penalty. I stared at the screen. 42,000. They were drowning and they were trying to use me as a life raft. I called Jessica immediately. "This is a joke, right?" "They are desperate," Jessica said. "They are throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks." Do you have the documentation? I have everything, I said. I opened my transition log again. I found the email I had sent to Karen on my last day. Subject: Account handoff Logit. Date: 2 weeks ago. Body: Karen. I have removed my user profile from the Logit system. Currently, there are 3 active admin seats, which is the maximum allowed under our Tier 2 license. If you need to add more users, you must upgrade the subscription to Tier 3, which costs an additional $2,000 a month. Do not add admin users without upgrading or we will face penalty audits. I took a screenshot of the email. I took a screenshot of the system log from my final day showing exactly 3 users. Then I pulled the new audit log that Logit had attached to their claim. It showed the user B. Whitaker creating 12 new admin accounts on the Tuesday after I left. I drafted the reply to Jessica. Please find attached the evidence that the system was compliant upon my departure. The violations occurred under the user profile of Brittany Whitaker 10 days after my resignation. Despite my explicit written warning, if they pursue this claim, I will countersue for defamation and legal fees. Jessica sent it. The claim died within an hour, but the damage to Maple Grove was done. Logit suspended their account until the fine was paid. The dispatch board went black for 3 days. Maple Grove had to run an HOA using whiteboards and text messages. They missed pickups. They lost trailers. The chaos was absolute. The industry was watching. You cannot hide a meltdown of this magnitude. At Elite Community Solutions, the rumors I had heard earlier, the ones about me being a saboteur, began to shift. The truth was leaking out. Drivers talk at truck stops. Vendors talk at bars. The narrative changed from Rachel broke the system to Rachel was the only thing holding that place together. My boss Elias Thorne stopped by my office on a Thursday afternoon. He closed the door. You have been getting calls, he said. It wasn't a question. A few, I admitted. Old clients. Vendors. They are asking if I'm coming back and I tell them I am happy where I am, I said. I tell them the truth. I am not involved. Elias nodded. He walked over to the window and looked out at the rail yards below. We have been monitoring the situation at Maple Grove, he said. They have lost 3 major contracts in the last month. The City Expo is gone. The automotive show is gone. Now the software audit. Their credit rating has been downgraded to junk status. He turned to look at me. His expression was serious, devoid of the usual corporate pleasantries. We are thinking about making a move. Rachel. My stomach tightened. A move. Acquisition, Elias said. Distressed asset purchase. We do not care about the brand. The Maple Grove name is toxic right now, but we want the assets. They have 40 trucks. They have a lease on a warehouse in a prime location near the port. And they have a crew of vendors who are some of the best in the business, vendors trained by you. I sat very still. Elite Community Solutions wanted to eat Maple Grove. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because if we buy them, Elias said, we are not keeping the management. Karen is out. Brittany is out. We are buying the hardware and the labor, and we need someone to lead the integration. We need someone who knows the fleet, knows the crew, and knows where the bodies are buried. He paused, letting the weight of the offer settle. We want you to run the acquisition, Rachel. We want you to go in there, evaluate the assets, decide who stays and who goes, and absorb it into Elite Community Solutions. I felt a rush of vertigo. It was the ultimate victory. I wouldn't just be returning. I would be returning as the conqueror. I would walk into that building not as a board member, but as the representative of the entity that owned them. I could save Miller. I could save Sarah. I could give them the stability and benefits of a major corporation. But to do it, I would have to sit across the table from Karen and sign the paper that erased her life's work. I would have to be the one to tell her that her empire was being sold for parts. I need time to think, I said. Take the weekend, Elias said. But do not take too long. The bank is circling. If we do not buy them, they go to auction. And if they go to auction, your people Miller, Sarah, they lose everything. He left the office. I sat there for a long time. The conflict was a physical pain in my chest. Part of me, the part that was still the little girl wanting approval, wanted to run away. I didn't want to be the executioner. I didn't want to see the look in Karen's eyes when she realized I was the one holding the pen. But the other part of me, the woman who had been exploited, diminished, and smeared, knew that this was the only way to save the things that actually mattered, the people, the work. If I said no, Maple Grove would die a messy death. The trucks would be repossessed. The staff would be fired with no severance. Karen would be left with nothing but debt. If I said yes, I could control the landing. It would be a crash landing, but I could save the passengers. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Karen. I stared at it. Usually, her texts were demands or accusations. This one was different. It was short. It was devoid of capitalization, which for Karen meant she was typing with one hand, likely holding a drink with the other. Bail me out, please. I can't fix this. Then a second message bubbled up. Buffett just called. They are pulling the loan. I need you, Rachel. But I'm also afraid you are right. I'm also afraid you are right. She wasn't admitting I was right about the salary or the software or Brittany. She was admitting I was right about her, that she wasn't the genius, that she wasn't the leader, that without me, she was just a woman standing in an empty clubhouse shouting at trucks that wouldn't move. I looked at the Elite Community Solutions logo on my wall. I picked up my phone. I didn't reply to Karen. I called Elias. Drop the papers, I said. I will lead the integration. Good, Elias said. We will set the meeting for Monday. One condition, I said. I walk in first before the lawyers. I want 10 minutes with the current owners alone. Done, Elias said. I hung up. I was going back. But I wasn't going back to save the neighborhood. I was going back to bury it so that something healthy could grow in its place. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I felt a strange cold resolve. The daughter was gone. The victim was gone. The CO had just arrived. I parked my car in the spot marked visitor. It was the same spot where Brittany's golf cart used to sit, the spot that had symbolized the beginning of the end. Now my sedan sat there, not as a symbol of status, but as an instrument of business. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was wearing a navy suit, tailored and sharp, no safety vest, no cristans. I took a breath, inhaling the recycled air of the climate control, and stepped out into the humid Indiana afternoon. The smell hit me instantly. Diesel, dust, and ozone. It was the scent of my 20s. It was the smell of sacrifice. But today it didn't smell like home. It smelled like an asset to be evaluated. I met Elias Thorne and the Elite Community Solutions legal team at the front entrance. Elias nodded to me. He handed me a thick folder. Ready? He asked. Ready, I said. We didn't use the employee entrance. We walked through the front glass doors. The one Brittany had insisted on frosting with a decorative pattern that was already peeling at the corners. The receptionist, a new girl I didn't recognize, looked up in panic at the phalanx of suits marching toward the conference room. She reached for the phone, presumably to warn Karen, but we were already past her. I opened the door to the conference room without knocking. Karen and Brittany were already there. They were sitting on the far side of the mahogany table, a table I remembered polishing myself before client meetings because we couldn't afford a cleaning service. Karen looked smaller. That was the first thing I noticed. The bluster, the broad-shouldered arrogance that had filled rooms for 3 decades had deflated. She was hunched over a stack of bank notices, her scarf askew. Brittany sat next to her. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, likely to hide swollen eyes. When she saw me, she stiffened, her posture shifting from defeat to defensive aggression. "What is she doing here?" Brittany hissed, looking at Elias. "We are negotiating with Elite Community Solutions, not her." I walked to the head of the table and pulled out the chair. I sat down, placing the folder in front of me. I waited for the rest of my team to settle before I looked at my former president. "I am Elite Community Solutions," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the tremor that used to plague me in this room. "I am the integration lead for this acquisition. Any terms discussed today go through me. Any paper signed today crosses my desk." Karen looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked from Elias to me, and I saw the realization hit her. She wasn't dealing with a competitor she could charm. She was dealing with the architect of her own machine returning to salvage the parts. "Rachel," Karen said, her voice raspy. "You came back. I am here to close the deal." "Karen," I corrected her. "We have 45 minutes before the bank's foreclosure deadline at 5 o'clock. Let's not waste time." Elias slid the purchase agreement across the table. It was heavy. It landed with a thud that echoed in the silence. "The offer is simple," I began, opening my copy. "Elite Community Solutions assumes the assets of Maple Grove Estates HOA that includes the fleet of 40 trucks, the warehouse lease, and the existing client contracts. We do not assume the debt. The debt remains with the Whitaker estate." "That bankrupts me," Karen whispered. "If you do not take the debt, the bank takes the house, they take the boat, they take everything. The purchase price for the assets is $2 million, I said. "That should cover the outstanding lien on the fuel credit line and the penalties from the city. It leaves you with zero, but it keeps you out of bankruptcy court. It is a clean break." Brittany slammed her hand on the table. "This is robbery," she shouted. "The brand alone is worth $5 million. We have a social media presence. We have a narrative." I turned to Brittany. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sneer. I just looked at her with the clinical detachment of an auditor. "Brittany," I said, "what is the current operating cost per mile for the fleet?" She blinked. "What? The cost per mile?" I repeated. "Is it 250? Is it 3? Do you know the number?" "That is a detail," she scoffed. "I focus on the big picture." "The big picture is made of details," I said. "Since you took over, the cost per mile has risen to $420 because of emergency repairs and inefficient routing. You are losing money every time a wheel turns. The brand isn't worth $5 million. The brand is a liability. We are buying the trucks because they are metal and rubber have value. Your narrative has none." Brittany opened her mouth to argue, but Karen reached out and touched her arm. "Stop," she said softly. Brittany recoiled as if she had been slapped. "Mom, you are taking her side. She planned this. She sabotaged us so she could come back here and humiliate us." "I did not sabotage you, Brittany," I said. "I left. You crashed the car because you never learned how to drive. And now I am the only tow truck in town." I turned back to Karen. "There are conditions to this purchase," I said. "Non-negotiable conditions." Karen rubbed her face with her hands. "Go on." "Clause for B," I said, flipping the page. "Retention of essential personnel. Elite Community Solutions guarantees employment for the next 12 months for the entire warehouse and driving staff. No layoffs. Full benefits transition. Their tenure at Maple Grove counts toward their seniority at Elite." Karen looked at me surprised. "You are protecting the crew." "Someone has to," I said. "Miller, Sarah, the rigging team, they stay. If you want this buyout, you sign that protection clause." "What about me?" Brittany asked, her voice smaller now. "Do I stay?" I looked at the paperwork. This was the part one had wrestled with the most. The vengeful part of me wanted to fire her on the spot, but the professional part of me knew that would look petty. "We have a role for you," I said. Brittany straightened up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Director consultant," I said. "Transition consultant. Non-operational. You will have no authority over staff, no access to the financial systems, and no access to the routing logic. You will be paid a flat fee for 3 months to answer questions about client histories. After that, the contract expires." "You are stripping me of everything," she whispered. "You are taking my office. You are taking my title. I am taking the steering wheel out of your hands before you kill someone," I said. "You can keep the title on LinkedIn if it makes you feel better, but you are not running this floor." The room fell silent. The air conditioner hummed. Karen looked down at the contract. She picked up a pen, her hand shaking. "I built this," she said, her voice trembling. 30 years. Rachel. I started with one van. I built an empire. You built a business. Karen," I said gently. "But you forgot to build a foundation. You thought you could run it on charisma and neighborhood loyalty forever. But the market doesn't care about your last name. Cares about competence." Karen paused, looking at Brittany, then at me. "I thought I was setting you up. I thought you were the strong one. I thought you could handle the background work so she could shine. I didn't think you didn't think I was a person," I finished for her. "You thought I was a utility, and when the utility stopped working, you realized you didn't know how to keep the lights on." Karen closed her eyes. She let out a long, shuddering breath. "If I sign this," she said, "it is over. The Whitaker name is off the building." "The name comes down," I confirmed. "But Miller keeps his house. Sarah keeps her health insurance. And you walk away without a bankruptcy filing on your record. It is a mercy, Karen." She looked at me. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the judgmental president or the demanding boss. I saw a tired, defeated woman who finally recognized that the board member she had undervalued was the only reason she was sitting in a chair and not a courtroom. She nodded slowly. "Where do I sign?" I pointed to the line at the bottom of the page. She signed. The scratching of the pen was the loudest sound in the world. Then she pushed the papers back to me. "It is yours," she said. I signed my name below hers. Rachel Bennett, Integration Lead, Elite Community Solutions. I closed the folder. "Funds will be wired to the escrow account by morning," Elias said, standing up. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker." Karen didn't stand up. She just sat there staring at the table. Brittany was crying silently behind her sunglasses. I stood up. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel a surge of joy. I just felt light. The weight of their expectations, their drama, their chaos, it was all gone. "I will be on the floor," I said. "I have to brief the team." I walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. I walked out onto the warehouse floor. It was shift change. The main bay doors were open, letting in the late afternoon sun. The dust motes danced in the light. Miller was there by the forklift charging station. Sarah was standing next to him holding a clipboard. They looked terrified. They knew the meeting was happening. They were waiting for the axe to fall. When they saw me, they froze. I walked over to them. The sound of my heels on the concrete was steady, confident. "Rachel," Miller asked, his voice tight. "Are we done?" I stopped in front of them. I looked at the crew that had been my real family for 4 years. "Maple Grove is done," I said. Miller's shoulders slumped. Sarah put a hand to her mouth. "But you are not," I continued. "Elite Community Solutions has acquired the fleet. I am leading the transition. I just signed the clause that guarantees every single job in this building. No laughs. Your tenure carries over. And Miller, your raise, the real one, the one that fits the market budget, is in the new payroll system effective Monday." Miller stared at me. His eyes welled up. He dropped his shop rag. You came back, he whispered. You actually came back for us. I told you, I said, a small smile touching my lips. I route the trucks. I don't leave cargo behind. Sarah grabbed me in a hug that nearly knocked the wind out of me. It wasn't a corporate hug. It was a desperate, grateful embrace. Thank you, she sobbed into my shoulder. Thank you. Thank you. I held her for a moment, looking over her shoulder at the office window. I saw Karen standing there, looking down at us. She was watching the crew hug me. She was watching the loyalty she had demanded but never earned being freely given to the board member she had pushed away. She raised her hand and touched the glass. A ghost of a wave. I didn't wave back. I nodded once. A closing of the book. I pulled away from Sarah. All right, I said, my voice returning to its professional cadence. Dry your eyes. We have a transition to execute. Miller, I want a full inventory of the fleet by tomorrow noon. Sarah, I need you to pull the driver logs for the last 30 days. We are going to scrub this operation until it shines. We do it right. We do it by the book. Yes, boss, Miller shouted, grinning. Copy that. Boss, Sarah said, wiping her face. I walked toward the loading dock, looking out at the line of trucks. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The ugly silver bird logo on the side of the trailer looked less permanent now. I knew the paint crew would be here on Monday to cover it with the Elite Community Solutions blue. I took a deep breath. I wasn't the board member anymore. I wasn't the fixer. I wasn't the victim. I was Rachel Bennett. And for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't waiting for permission to exist. I had walked through the fire of my neighborhood's dysfunction. And I hadn't just survived. I had engineered my way out. I walked to the edge of the dock and looked at the horizon. Some people say you can't choose your community. That is true. But you can choose your terms. You can choose your worth. And most importantly, you can choose when to walk away and when to walk back in through the front door. If you were me standing on that dock with the keys to the kingdom finally in your hand but the bridge to your old president burned to ash, would you feel regret? Or would you feel the wind on your face and realize that for the first time it was blowing at your back? Would you go back to be loved or would you walk away to finally truly live? Thank you so much for listening to the conclusion of Rachel's story. It has been a wild ride from that first certification snub to this final boardroom showdown. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe winding down at home? Let me know in the comments below. I love seeing our community map light up from all over the world. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of karma, resilience, and HOA revenge, please make sure to subscribe to HOA Karen Chronicles. Smash that like button. And if you really want to support the channel, hit that hype button so we can get these stories out to more people who need a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is just massive success. Stay strong, know your worth, and I'll see you in the next story.